Hello and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed and we are reading the Phaedo. Now, what have we been doing lately? We have been asking the question, what would make the greatest hero's tale? The last action hero, the last action story. What would be the ideal hero? And whether or not Socrates is functioning in that way in this Phaedo. We ask the question, what would we need to be able to make that judgment? How could we judge whether or not this is the greatest hero's tale? Well, we've talked about being able to understand what would the paradigm be? What would the conditions be? What would he have to do to be the greatest hero? We talked about the philosophical idea that permeates all through philosophy, going from the many to the one. The particulars to the singular, the adjectives to the noun. All through philosophy, all through our read-alongs, that has been a quest that we're on. How do we go from examples of particular beautiful things to beauty itself? How do we go from the particular aspects of being, beauty itself, justice itself, goodness itself, to the singular way of understanding it, the highest experience of it, the hyparxis of it? In the text, we've been talking about how do we go from many souls to the hyparxis or one soul. So if we were to apply that to our question about what would make the ideal hero, a hero that does not save particular people, a hero that does not save a particular problem, does not address and solve a particular problem, but one, the hyparxis of all problems, what would be needed to solve all problems? That would be the greatest kind of hero, simply by definition. Now, we've also been learning about the dialectic. So we wondered, what would it be like to apply the dialectic to this puzzle, this question? Keep in mind, we have been collecting questions because to have a question is to be on a quest. So we thought, well, okay, everything we've been seeing turns out to be the dialectic. Sometimes many episodes later, we look back on what we were doing and we discovered we were doing the dialectic the whole time. In a similar way, we can look back on our lives and all people and realize, oh, hang on a second, if all people seek goodness in whatever they do, then all people the whole time are philosophers, innately. Our job here in this life is to awaken to that nature. If we all are attracted to beauty, if we all seek to join with, be as close to forever with our object of love, then we're ultimately going to be unfulfilled until we can do that. And you can only join with that which is beautiful in the realm of being. This is the union with that which is pure and uniform, that in philosophy we call knowledge or nous. So we're all philosophers, or we all yearn to be philosophers. In fact, in our reading, Socrates made that point. All physical things yearn to being and have a purpose to remind ourselves that we're here to learn, not just learn about sticks and beautiful things, but to learn about their cause, to learn about what beauty is, go from the particulars to the one. So all physical things yearn for being and help others by reminding us that we all yearn for being, because we start as human beings perceiving through our senses. That's when the love of learning grabs us. Then we have to upgrade to the love of wisdom when we recognize, oh, hang on a second, real learning isn't about identifying particulars, Aristotelian thinking. modern science, learning is really about getting the thing itself. Thumbs up. In fact, we could apply the dialectic to that. The thing itself, its definition, not how it functions, how it demonstrates itself, and not in its divisions, the many examples, but the thing itself. And if we start by looking at the examples, because we all start by looking through our senses as human beings, then we are at the division stage. We need to synthesize our divisions, analyze it relative to the thing itself. So we start in the last two categories of the dialectic. And that's where we are in the text. So if we apply this thinking about the dialectic to the text, then we could say, okay, what would Socrates have to do to be the ideal hero? He'd have to define what it is that can save everything. Not the particulars, the ultimate, the ideal. But he'd also have to be able to demonstrate it if he was a hero. And usually there are balloons when I do this. There they are. But for us to be able to see and judge whether or not he can do it, we have to participate. So those last two sections of the dialectic that we just mentioned we're in, confetti, divisions and synthesis, we have to do. Just like we said, we start in our senses, we have to take the divisions, the many, the examples, synthesize it and analyze it back, relate it back to the particular, relate it back to the universal. Lots of balloons today. So too do we have to do that with this text. Socrates is defining something as the ideal hero. He has to demonstrate it. These are conditions. Lots of balloons. And we have to be able to put the pieces together ourselves. The vision stage. Or recognize the pieces, recognize the terms, the logos, the patterns, the dialectic structure, the relationships, and unify that together to understand what that thing is that he is demonstrating, he is defining. What is that thing that he's been talking about? So within the dialectic, the four categories, you could break them off into two sections and say Socrates is here, we are here. So for us to be able to judge whether or not Socrates is the ideal hero, we have a criteria for him, but we have a criteria for ourselves. We have to match him. We have to play the game. And that's what philosophy is. It's not about fighting. It's not about debating. It's not about finding mistakes people made and using that to inflict violence on them in the form of punishment. It's not about loving violence or contention. All of the things that we usually are taught are good and just in the world. It's none of those things. It's those things we can see as the shadow of what is true virtue. What is it? It's participating. Maybe participating is the wrong word. It's sharing. It's engaging. It's an activity. It's a dialectic. We are in a dialectic with reality, with the logos. And when we have those two, we recognize those are two of a triad. So we could say we're in a dialectic with the self-logos that we're getting from this text through Socrates. We're in a dialectic with reality. There's some intelligence communicating the self-logos to us, appropriate to us in our circumstance. We call that providence. But even that has a cause. So we are ultimately in a dialectic with self. So that's what we have to do in this text. We have to participate. We have to share. We have to engage. We have to raise ourselves to the level that Socrates is at. We've been talking about that being reading without interpretation. If you're interpreting, you're adding what isn't there or you're missing what is. But if you're reading what is without interpretation, you're bringing your mind to match the mind of the author. And if the author is participating at the level of the self-logos, we are raising our mind to the self-logos. And within the text, Socrates has been talking about that's the doctrine of philosophy itself. To raise your state of being, your level of purification and perfection to the level that being is purified, being is perfect. Raising mind to mind itself, because being is mind itself, the object of knowledge. So we're raising our minds to know the mind itself, matching him. We talked about, well, if there's an ideal hero, not only does he have to be able to demonstrate it, like, you know, our modern heroes like Superman, he should be able to define it. And of course, our modern heroes can't do that because our culture hasn't awoken to the logos yet. Superman doesn't know what is justice. In fact, that's the nature of most of the drama. But a true hero, a better hero, should be able to define and demonstrate. But we said, actually, we can go one better. An even better hero, a more perfect or more ideal hero, should be able to pass on his ability to function as a hero. Pass on his power, pass on his quirk. So that others can play the game, others can pick it up. And we said, well, we can go even one better than that. By others picking up the tradition, the lineage, maybe they could improve it, add to it. Because that, by definition, is more ideal than just maintaining it, making it better. So we can see a lot of people are in different traditions and they want to maintain it. They don't want to improve it. They're afraid of change. Or they lack what they need to be able to think and judge individual things for themselves to see whether or not it's worthy. So whatever is involved in being a hero, the hero needs to be able to define it and demonstrate it and provide what is needed to pass it on in a way that those people could not just pick it up, but develop it. So this raises a puzzle. There are a lot of traditions who don't want anything new. They're taught to fear new things. Try it. Try going into an ashram of some tradition and say, hey, you guys could really benefit by introducing the Phaedo into your studies. See what they say. I almost guarantee they will be like, no, we don't want to corrupt our tradition by adding in other things. Why not? Why would it be a corruption? Well, we are learning in the text that, well, hang on a second. This is the great danger. This is what Socrates says, this is the cause of villainy. If you just trust something as true, without yourself being able to discern truth and goodness, then you're setting yourself up for the worst kind of failure. You might be let down. You might be in this tradition and realize there are some flaws in it. But you could think, well, hang on a second, I was convinced by that argument. So maybe logic itself doesn't exist. Reality is not knowable because I once thought Buddhism was right, but now I see that they made a lot of mistakes. And my ability to judge is wrong. And we can identify that, that's from the text, we can identify that as the triad. Logos, reality or mind, and self. Socrates says that's the greatest problem, the greatest defect, the worst condition. To trust something that wasn't actually trustworthy and to be let down and to suffer those blows over and over again and eventually come to the conclusion that there is nothing sound and stable, good and knowable. Apply that to people. Well, we have the backstory, the origin story of most villains. They trusted someone who let them down and now they hate humans. They think there's nothing sound and stable, nothing good and trustworthy of humans. And Socrates saying that's an analogy for the logos. There is no reality that's good and knowable. There is no understanding nature of everything, the logos. And of course, these are the things that we're taught in our culture. So we are suffering from the disaster, the villainy, the vice, the worst condition. We are, as a culture, playing out the implications of the greatest defect of the soul. Because what are we taught about that which is most meaningful? You can't know the nature of reality. You can't know the mind of God. You can't know what happens when you die. This is the mainstream opinion. Also, you can't understand it. You can't understand what it would mean to reach the meaning of life, to understand the nature of reality. These are not possible things to be understood. And likewise, the implications trickling down, you can't understand what is a good and rational way of governing the world. There's no actual knowableness to that, and understandability, the two pillars of philosophy, understanding and knowing. So let's just allow tyrants if we like them. If they're familiar or attractive, or if they play on probability, that's what Simius has been saying, probability and attractiveness, and this is the appeal. Fascists tend to appeal to attractiveness, nostalgia, what's familiar. They'll use language like family values and hope. So you fill in what's attractive to you, your family. Make the country great again. Often fascists use that language. So you can fill in what's familiar, what's attractive from your past. Grifters use this. And the other side is probability. Well, not really. They both kind of do the same thing. But it's kind of thought that the more progressives use science, use more rationality in their thinking, and try and take a more scientific approach to addressing human problems. Doesn't seem to happen much, but that's the story anyway. But Simius is saying not just probability or attractiveness or familiarity. Both of those things are not a good way of thinking. Shouldn't be what we use to make decisions. Because those things led me to conclude something disastrous about the nature of the soul. So what do we need? Socrates is saying the art of the logos. This is an art, this is a power that allows you to judge individual arguments. So that you don't just believe Socrates or just trust this politician or just trust this argument that Socrates gave even, but then somebody comes along and contradicts it in a way that sounds familiar. Then all of a sudden, after doing that many times, you might be led to believe there isn't any understanding, there isn't any knowability, there isn't any meaning or purpose to life. And this is the greatest defect of the soul. So, whatever is this superpower or quirk or hero's ability that Socrates has to demonstrate and define, it needs to involve this ability to think and judge for ourselves. So often in our culture that lacks the logos, we are told to believe in ourselves or believe in Superman or have hope that good will prevail. They lack it. We lack it. Our mythology lacks it. Our understanding lacks it. Our politics lack it. Everything lacks it. Our spirituality lacks it. But it's needed. Socrates is saying, hey, if you lack this ability to think and judge individual arguments for yourself, if this isn't the bedrock of what you trust, then you're setting up yourself for the greatest defect of the soul, and represented with people, villainy, vice. And he calls that the art of the logos. So that fourth element of what would be the ideal hero, not just the hero defining it and demonstrating it, not just being able to pass it on, but giving us what we need to, lots and lots of balloons today, giving us what we need to be able to add to it. So we're different to those other traditions that lack the ability to think in this way, lack the art of the logos. So when somebody comes and says, oh, this is a very good tradition of meditation you have at this retreat here, you could improve it by adding this thing. Their reaction won't be, oh, no, you can't do that. Everyone wants to come in and introduce their own opinions, and that's just going to corrupt the whole thing, and we're happy where we are. That's crazy. When you think about it, imagine if you, I don't know, you're having a meal and the waiter comes along and said, oh, this meal would be made a lot better if you introduce this pepper to your salad, or this wine to your meal, or this dessert. You wouldn't say, oh, no, I can't think like that for myself. I can't. No, it's better not to think. It's better not to judge. And just do what we've always done. And of course, we recognize doing what we've always done being the problem. Blind allegiance to what's familiar in the past. So, our conditions for what would be the ideal hero has to involve passing on something that includes the art of the logos. Necessarily, so that we can solve the problems, the cause of problems, villainy itself, address the cause of our individual personal problems, thinking that we, as judges, reality, or the logos, is not good and knowable, sound and stable. We have to be able to nip that in the bud, which would be the cause of all of our problems, and those familiar with philosophical midwifery can recognize, oh, that's the pathologos. Our translator mentioned that in the translation. A fundamental belief that the self is inadequate, or reality, or the logos. The three aspects of the excellence of self. And if he can pass on this art of the logos, we might be able to improve the tradition, add more to it. Because we have what we need to think for ourselves. Not just trust, but trust with something else. What would those things be? Well, we've already mentioned words like understanding, dianoia. We've mentioned the dialectic and the logos going hand in hand. We've mentioned nous or noesis. So understanding and noesis, those are two higher cognitive functions than trust. There's also a mysterious one called phronesis, which might be higher even than noesis, higher even than knowledge. There's a mention of clarity that was dropped in, so that could be a clue to something higher than, if knowledge is the brilliant light of being, maybe there's a state beyond that called clarity. So these are our hypotheses, possible solutions to our puzzle. Because if we've read that you can't just trust the logos, I mean, you have to trust the logos. You have to call on it. You should go to its aid, defend it, as Socrates is saying, call it in, watch it unfold from self. When we are in this flow state, it's like the self is talking through us in a certain sense. Or maybe at a higher level of awareness or enlightenment, we realize there is no individual self, there is no personality, there is just the self emanating the logos, which might be why Socrates is saying, oh, don't worry about Socrates as a person. Forget about that guy. Just look at the logos. Look at the truth of the logos. If it's true, it will naturally have a persuasive beauty to it. I'm not like those other kinds who think that truth is your ability to persuade. So there might be a recognized, and by the way, that might shed some light on another puzzle we had. Why did Socrates say he would even lament less if the soul is destroyed after our physical body's death? He said, well, hang on a second. If the soul leaves the self after our physical body, that means my ignorance would dissipate shortly after. So, because Socrates is saying, hey, there's arguments that show that the soul exists beyond our lifetime, and there's a consequence to how we live, how we nurture the soul, and it affects our reincarnations. And we want to do our work here, complete our work here, and join Socrates where he's going, because he trusts that he's going to a different place with better men who've completed their work and better gods and masters, and maybe good daemons too. So a higher evolution. So there's a significance to the way we live, and he's talked about how we have to become a philosopher and not a lover of the body, because that nails our soul to the body by thinking that pains and pleasures are most real and clear. So that's his argument, but he's saying, hey, I'm arguing for the immortality of the soul in all these different ways. The logos of learning and these other ones that we've gone through already. But if it was the other case, if the soul did dissipate, I wouldn't be worried about that. I wouldn't lament that. And he words it in an interesting way. If the soul leaves self, he doesn't say the self can be destroyed. That's completely off the table for the Greek philosophers, which is a clue for us. What is the ultimate nature beyond the cause even of ultimate reality? Is the quest to know thyself the quest to reach the first and final cause? Therefore, it's impossible to say there's no self. That's a fun question to puzzle on. What would happen if there was no self? Could there be anything ever? Even if there's an illusion, there must be some self perceiving the illusion. So he says, if the soul dissipates, it would leave self, which would mean I would lose my ignorance. And that might point to something that we are talking about now, that our sense of individuality tied to our sense of soul is an illusion, is ignorance. There might be as we've seen in the argument, there might be a hyparxis of all souls, a singular soul, which is united with that which is pure, the hyparxis of beings. So ultimate reality and soul is no different. And this is necessary for us to learn, because learning is remembering. And what we're remembering, we must have known at some time. And he's calling that a union with the hyparxis of all of the beings. So that's another curious puzzle we're taking with us. Maybe the logos, maybe this flow state through which we watch the logos unfold, just as Socrates stood back and watched the own logos that he put forward, his own arguments. He sat back and watched them and puzzled on them. And he said already, hey, this is nothing to do with Socrates. And he said, oh, if losing the soul is really losing ignorance. So he's giving us clues about what that might be like when we get there, which is important because we talked about the hero being able to define and demonstrate his heroicness, and Superman can demonstrate his superpowers, but he can't define it. But we are defining it. But we hope to ourselves, if we are to match him, if the criteria for his heroicness is to pass it on, then we are the ones he's passing it on to. Meaning we have to match him. Meaning we ourselves need to be able to define and demonstrate it. So not only do we have to define the art of the logos, we have to demonstrate it, live it, experience it, feel it. So all these extra things that Socrates is adding in, he's not doing it for fun. As Dr. Grimes would say, he's not getting paid by the word. He's giving us clues to what it would be like to be there. How would we recognize it? Hey, if our goal is to know thyself, wouldn't we need some sort of indication that we're there? If your goal is to drive from LA to Las Vegas, don't you need to have some indication that you've arrived at your destination? Some sign saying, welcome to Las Vegas? So too, if we are to demonstrate it, if this is a spiritual journey, if this is personal development, shouldn't we have some sort of indications to tell us that we're there? What would it be like? Well, Socrates is there. That's the implications from what he's saying. He trusts that he's going to a good place, that he's been initiated, therefore, that he's completed his work, that he has the art of the Logos. And of course, we can see it being demonstrated in how well he argues, how well he uses the dialectic to help, to benefit his friends, and how well he recognizes the significance of passing on the ultimate benefit. He's saying, hey, if I can't just change your mind about the soul because someone's going to contradict me when I'm gone, and then you're going to be thrown into chaos. Already, just hearing Simius and Cebes, it's so familiar, this argument that the soul is like harmony. It's a byproduct, like we're taught often. That's so familiar and attractive that I doubt myself. I believe Socrates, but now I don't. So I doubt myself, and I doubt reality. Maybe reality is irrational. If I can be tricked so well, maybe it's not knowable. And this whole Logos thing that Socrates was using to show us the soul is immortal, maybe that can be thrown into question too. So he says, yeah, I can't leave you like that, because that would be like a bee stinging you and then dying. When a bee stings you, he dies, and leaving you with a sting. I can't be like that. I have to leave you with the opposite of the sting. So he recognizes it, and he's setting it out for us to see. And often he gives us the opposites. So he'll say, I'm not going to give you the bee sting. So we have to do the work and say, what would be the opposite? That means he wants to leave us after he dies with something that is the opposite of a bee sting, is beneficial and great. He wants to leave us with the best thing. So that's an example of division. He's not telling us. He's giving us enough clues for us to work it out ourselves. Division, dividing it up into pieces, into key terms, into patterns, so that we can recognize when something is missing, when there's a puzzle that needs to be solved. Terms and relationships. Looking for patterns in those. That's the division stage. Giving us what we need to pick it up ourselves, because we can't pick it up by trusting him, by just believing. Literally, that's what he's been saying. That's the problem. You can't do that. You can't just trust without something greater. So when he said, I trust that I'm going to a good place, he trusts it, but it's not just trust. It's not hope. It's something else. And he's already mentioned dianoia, and he's already mentioned nous, and he's already mentioned the initiation into phronesis. So we can add those in. Which of those are involved in the art? This is one of our questions. What are the cognitive functions necessary for an art that we have to add to our trust? Otherwise, we're going to suffer the greatest defect. And how does this relate to division? How does this relate to the fact he's not giving us the answers, but giving us the pieces to solve? And we, as a community, have been going along, and we've got a little blackboard that we're using to take notes, look for key terms, look for patterns, look for puzzles, solve those puzzles, look for triads, especially triads, duads, fourads, which are patterns of terms, patterns of relationships of terms. Come up with insights, share those insights. So we're engaging in that division stage. So that division stage is where we meet him and talk back And at the end of all of this, we should synthesize, well, at every stage, every new division, we should synthesize that to relate it back to the start, so that we can understand the first thing better. We got the doctrine of philosophy definition. But then when we do the division stage, we're going to understand more about the doctrine of philosophy. It's not just the art and practice of death and dying. There's the trust in the logos. There's a state of calling it in. There's something that we should recognize that lets us know that we're in it. There's an art involved. There's reincarnation involved. There's a mystical experience involved. Initiation. So every time we put new pieces together, we relate it back to the original thing to see it in a new way. Which is the same pattern we've been talking about in the hero's ability. Every time it's passed on into a new person, they should be able to see it in a new way, add it to that original thing to see it better, to do it better, to improve the quirk, improve the superpower. Thumbs up. And of course, let's keep going. We're looking for patterns. Part of patterns is recognizing it at one level and applying it to a higher level. What about reality itself? Socrates is saying, hey, if the soul dies, of course, there's always going to be a self. So self is something you can bank on. So if we're all from self, or if there's a hypothesis of beings that we started from, why leave it? To be incarnated, only to relearn it and remember it. That's a big puzzle, because there's a lot of ups and downs, there's a lot of pain and suffering in the physical world. Why go through all that? It has to be worth it for this to be just. How can it be worth it if you're just going back to where you started from? Well, maybe this sheds some light on that puzzle. When you go back to it through the dialectic, you see it in a new way. You make the superpower better. And of course, we're talking about some spiritual traditions that lack the art of the logos, can't do it with their tradition. They think the virtue is keeping it exactly the same as it was 1,000 years ago. They can't recognize benefit that could be added to it. So it's stagnant. They just keep turning around on the same thing. That's not to say there's nothing good in it, but it lacks something fundamental that we were saying would make it more ideal. So maybe we can bring that to our big question. Why, if everything is from self, in self, and returning to self, why go through this? Why have to read the Phaedo? Why have to watch these videos? Why have to participate in whatever way we can? If we're just going to where we started from? Well, this might be a question. If it's this idea of seeing it in a new way, improving it in some way, or a spiraling up motion. Opposite to a stagnation. And of course, the con artists and the grifters and the fascists talk about keeping it the way it was in the past. Stagnation. No improvement. No progression. Conservatism. Keep it the way it always was. And all the terrible, terrible problems of the past, nah, can't keep them. And of course, even for those who aren't like that, addressing problems in today, well, if you lack the art of the logos, how can you solve problems? All you can do is, I guess, punish people for having problems, which is sadism. If you've got a problem, you punish them. And we see that comically. There's a homeless problem. What do? Punish the homeless. Well, hang on a second. Why are you punishing someone for suffering from a problem? Because you don't know how to understand it. And you think wisdom is inflicting suffering. Fundamental ignorance, fundamental villainy, expressed through mythology. There's a problem of crime. What do? Address the cause, which is almost always wealth inequality. A big difference between the rich and the poor, so that the poor have to do crimes to survive. Address it with understanding. Understanding relative to a true paradigm, to truth, that's universally accessible, that is sound and firm, understandable and knowable. Logos and reality. The art of the Logos? Nope. Just punish people, put them in prison, torture them. It's irrational, unjust, and absurd. So all of this can go into category B. In the dialectic, we do what is and what isn't. What would be the kind of universe that would exist if philosophy isn't, or if the art of the Logos isn't? So that can be our next dialectic. Punishing people for having problems, hoping that somehow that will address the cause. Of course it won't. That's absurd. It's villainy. Punishing the homeless, punishing people who have to do crime to survive. We're all here for a reason. We all have problems. Every single one of us. Therefore, what, are you going to kill everybody? Oh, that's what Socrates said. You end up hating all humans. So these are the implications that follow without the art of the Logos, and why we are in the problems we're in as a society and individually. How often do you beat up on yourself? How often do you, as Socrates says, self-imprisonment is the greatest aid to our imprisonment. How often do you beat yourself up? Do you punish yourself in whatever way? If the dialectic involves helping people recognize their divine and noble nature, then how well are you doing it with yourself? How well are you being a hero with you in your dialectic that's always happening with self? We have to match Socrates to others and to ourselves. Actually, others secondary. Socrates says, I'm greedy for the Logos. I want to know the truth, not so I can convince others, it's for myself. There will be a secondary benefit if it's true. It'll naturally be beautiful and persuasive, but I want it for me. So we need to be a hero for ourselves. Secondarily, we'll be a hero to others. The greater your light can shine, the more you can illuminate the darkness of others. And fortunately, we can recognize this. But recognize it in a way where we can understand it. That's what the dialectic gives us. Lots of people look at punishing homelessness or punishing criminals or genocide or war, and they realize there's something terribly wrong and absurd and irrational and harmful and unjust about it. But they lack what they need to address it. They lack what they need to understand it, to organize all of those particular terms within a hierarchical structure that is a part of a paradigm that has an eternal pure existence, sound and stable existence. They don't have the model to organize all of the particulars, number one. And then once they're organized, you can see, oh, they follow. These are the implications of a hierarchy. That's the dialectic. And if you have that, you can trace that hierarchy back to what's more primary. What's the cause? What's the cause of villainy? What's the cause of homelessness? What's the cause of crime? What's the cause of poverty? Easy once you have the hierarchical arrangement of terms. Because each higher, more hierarchically primary term is more causal of that which follows. It has a scope over the others. Not only that, if it's an art, there would also be skill, or techne was the word from the text, involved in applying that art to address those causes of those problems. If you recognize this is inside B, what is its counter inside A? What is its correlate that we can introduce to address that particular problem? If this is what happens when the art of the Logos is missing, how do we add the art of the Logos in that particular and within the higher causes as well? How can we introduce the art of the Logos? So this is a problem that we're facing as a society. Everyone knows there's corruption and problems. We lack what we need to organize it. Number one, understand it. Number two, we lack what we need to address it, purify the problems. And we lack what we need to perfect ourselves. Once we purify ourselves from our problems, that's not the end of the game. We are afforded more freedom to pursue our highest goals without those problems getting in the way to distract us. But we have to apply that same, what is it? Understandable? What's the text? I'm doing my best to use the terms from the text as we go. If there is a true logos that is give me a minute. If there is a certain logos that is true and firm and capable of being understood, if there is a soundness and stability among the logos that is understandable and reality, and if there are a techne and rules and structure to an art of those things, then we can apply it to not just understand the problems, but perfect them, to free ourselves from them, escape the chains of fate, but also to perfect ourselves, to reach our highest excellence, to evolve. And that's what we're here for. We're here to evolve. So Socrates is giving us what we need to do both sides of that equation. Understand and purify, and experience and evolve. Purification and perfection. So those things are involved in the art of the logos, the thing that makes him being able, and this meets the conditions that we set for what would make someone a ideal hero, the greatest hero. Not just addressing a particular problem, and then tomorrow there's another problem, and then tomorrow there's another problem, and then so on and so on and so on. But addressing all problems, from the many to the one, from the particulars to the cause. That's the art of the logos. So, fantastic. Isn't that wonderful? Clap for that. What do you say, Owen?
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. But we wouldn't see that we are reading the greatest hero story unless we were ourselves participating, unless we were reading without interpretation and reading actively, doing it ourselves. Clap in the chat, thanks. We wouldn't recognize this as the greatest story. Now we can say, well, we can give a bit of a break to people because we've only had this Balboa translation for 2001 for like less than 5 years. So it's only been possible for us to actively engage in the puzzles, looking for the terms and missing terms. So not only do we need the exact terminology, but that's needed so we can find out when there's some slight deviations because the questions are slight. It wouldn't be a very good video game if the puzzles were obvious. So too in this text. You wouldn't have to engage yourself very much if it was too obvious. It'd be a dull movie. So only in the last 5 years have we had what we need to discover this is the greatest kind of text. But equally so, that's something that happened to us through history. So we should be able to use this art of the logos to understand why. Why has it taken us so long to rediscover this greatest thing and not beasting that Socrates is leaving us? Nice. So we've only had what we've needed to do this game in the last 5 years. So that's exciting. So we can oh cool, thank you chat. So we can unblack pill ourselves. Like there's a meme that because we're suffering these terrible effects of late stage capitalism, things are getting worse, the rich are getting richer, which means more poverty because wealth is relative, of course. And things just keep getting worse. There doesn't seem to be light at the end of the tunnel. There doesn't seem to be anything turning it around. We're just getting better and better at enslavement and tyranny and oppression and war. There's a culture called Doomer culture. Black pills. But if we recognize, hey, we've only had this text since 2021, then we can understand why there is such a black pill culture. But we have something new we can introduce. We have the golden pill. I like golden because you could say that this is the golden age of our culture, introducing a recognition of our spiritual purpose and the understandability of it, giving us an understanding and spiritual tradition that was fantastic and true and beneficial. So it's our golden age. You could also say golden because the golden ratio. This logos, some people have recognized, well, the golden ratio is the mathematical representation of the logos. Platonic pill, yeah. So take the gold pill. Then it's a reference to the Neo. In the film The Matrix, the main character Neo, which is an anagram of the One, is offered a blue pill and a red pill. The blue pill is to maintain ignorant, to like the idea that the brainwashingness of culture and corporate life is keeping that as real, or the red pill, waking up to the fact that it's an illusion, it's a scam, it's a prison based on images and beliefs. Now that red pill has been taken over by con artists, conservatives, the right wing, the ones that want to protect their own personal ignorance, or grift people, giving people the illusion of climbing a ladder, but there's really the shadow. We've been talking about that. And then as a response to that, there's the black pill, people who recognize, oh, it's all, there's nothing good out there. There's nothing that's actually changing. Sun-pilled, yeah. But if there's a red and a blue, well, there's a black and a golden. We have the golden pill, so we can do this now. We can awaken and complete what Socrates was doing. If to be an ideal hero is not only to define and demonstrate, but to divide it up, to to do something so that others can pick up on this power of the ideal hero. Of course, there was a counterattack. Literally, he's being murdered for doing this, for being the ideal hero, which is, tragic. And of course, there was the counterattack to Socrates, Aristotle, and the moderns that stopped the big quest that we've been talking about, going from particulars to the universal, going from a beautiful adjectives to the noun, and coming to the conclusion that Socrates is pointing out is what follows without the art of the logos. That there is no reality. There's just the physical world. And there is no firm, true, understandable logos. It's our tradition. A counterattack to this golden pill, this golden age. That has to be recognized as part of the process, but we can take the golden pill now, and that's what we're doing. So those are the stakes for what we've seen and what we're reading. We have to therefore play the dialectic back with him. We have to do the division stage. Look for the terms, look for the patterns, look for the structure. Look for the puzzles. Nail down the right words. Read it without interpretation. Look for things that stand out as missing. Or look for patterns at one level and apply it to the next level. Like Socrates did, hey, by the way, you've seen the many beings, but you've recognized there's a hyparxis called self-ousia. Apply that to the level of soul. So you see it at one level, and then you apply it to the next level, or the higher level. All of these ways we've been learning is part of the art of philosophy. which might be tied into the art of the logos, by the way. Doing it, because Socrates says, hey, I'm watching it unfold too. And if anybody else sees more clearly, please take me along. So it's doing it, but also he's sharing it. So communicating in a way where you are providing those terms, structures, patterns, that can be understood, that others can apply their intelligence to, reflect on, focus on, meditate on, contemplate with, to learn it for themselves and develop the art, not just trust, art. So, for us to be able to judge whether or not the text is successful and he is the greatest hero, we need to match him. And to match him, we need to play too. We need to meet him. We need to do our part of the dialectic. He's doing side one, person one, we're doing person two. We have to do division and synthesis. We have to play. And if we can, what are the stakes? We'll pick up his superpower, his quirk. We'll have what we need to develop it further. We'll have what we need to benefit ourselves in this life and the next. We'll have what we need to have a secondary benefit of helping others, including passing on what humanity needs to solve its problems and perfect itself in its evolution, something we're sorely lacking. Transform the world and save humanity itself. And all of those together, so those are themselves parts. Could unify that together into one word. The ideal hero. So actually that's a good exercise. What would the ideal hero be? So those are the stakes, and that's why we're playing, and that's the importance of this game, and how cool it is, and how it's only in the last 5 years that we can play it. But thankfully we can. We have what we need. So let's jump in on that note. So these are our notes from last week, last episode. This is a drawing of those two aspects that we've been talking about. The logos that goes upward towards being, and its shadow. This is the spiraling up, and its shadow, the stagnant. So we're talking about it historically in history, the same repeating of failures and problems throughout humanity. But of course, the logos and being gives us what we need to climb that ladder up, but it also gives us what we need to understand its shadow, its reflection. Why are those that teach the pathologos, the shadow of the logos, why were they convincing? Why do grifters, why are they successful in their grifts? So Socrates pointed out, by the way, if you don't trust what he's saying, his arguments about the immortality of the soul and the nature of philosophy, if you don't do it with the art of the logos, you will end up with this condition, the greatest defect. And what do they end up saying? There is no logos. There is no firm, stable, understandable pattern to reality. And there is no realm of being that is the goal of that pattern and the cause of it unfolding. So the two very things to solve problems here and to perfect ourselves is gone. No being, no logos. No nous, no dianoia. No self-mind, no self-reason. And of course we recognize that once we get there, that's not the end of it, as the ladder goes up further. And as we've been saying, you apply what you've seen of one realm to the higher. That's called anagogic movement. That's part of solving puzzles. So we can ask the question, when we reach being, when we meet Socrates where he is, with better men and gods who've completed their work down here, what are they up to? And what's the significance of returning to it? If all learning is remembering this, which we once knew before we were born, What's the point of unfolding it into into physical, into the realm of becoming, only to return back to it? That's a big question. What's the significance of returning with the logos? What can you do here with the logos as a philosopher that you can't if you experience this state through Taoism or Buddhism or something else that lacks the art of the logos? So that's where we're at. And of course we mentioned, well, we have to play, so with this text, this story, we've seen certain key ideas. We've seen the idea, well, we have what we need to solve problems. We've also seen the greatest defect inside B. Side B, of course, if this thing doesn't exist. So we can say, well, this could be a dialectic on the art of the logos. Side A is if we have the art of the logos. Side B, if we don't, isn't. We've seen if it isn't, it's the greatest defect. We've seen it's the cause of vice because the aspects of the logos are needed in our virtues. Otherwise, we are mastering some pleasures to be mastered by others. So all of the vices. We talked about hating humans. Or being black-pilled. Or villainy. Represented through stories. So we need this for the virtues. So what we're doing here is taking this and applying its opposite and see would it fit here. That's part of playing. Oh, well, if our vices arise from not having the art of the logos, then what's needed in the logos, what's needed in having the art of the logos is necessary for the virtues. And that follows. Because earlier we did a exploration of what makes the virtues virtues compared to the vices. Somewhere up here, I believe. Over here? Yes, so the vice versions of the virtues, alliteration. The vice version of sound-mindedness is to master some of your pleasures to be mastered by others. Courage is to be motivated by fear and necessity. I'm only accepting death because I am afraid of a worse fate, not because I'm actively seeking it through philosophy. The vice version of virtue, of the virtue of wisdom, clarity of sight, caring for yourself, seeing, planning, understanding, but not directed towards being. So what's missing in all those virtues that isn't in what's missing in the vices that is in the virtues? What do you desire in the vice? A pleasure. What do you desire with the virtue of sound-mindedness? Being and truth as your focus. Or in the early stages, logos. So we talked about this, the soul, your reasoning part, your outwardly moving part, and your inwardly desiring part. This is your desires. If you desire what reason wants, and reason follows the logos, and you're holding on to in your outward movement what the logos says is true, you've got this part, the hyparxis, ruling the others. So the necessary element is logos directed towards being. So we've already seen that. And of course, because we have these great technology on the internet, we can go back and rewatch it if we want in the past episodes. So it fits. So we saw what Socrates gave us over here. He gave us this, vice and villainy. And so we ourselves hypothesized, well, would that mean that if we did have the art of the logos, we would have what's needed for the virtues? And then we tested that and we saw, yeah, we have made notes on that. So it was right. This is the game. Hating humans or villainy. And so I guess what that would that be? You would have to love or empathy and benefit humanity, and equally so for the logos. There's no reality. That's what's the word? Soundness or stability. So goodness and real. No reality. Sound and stable. Or good and real. Or universal. Maybe universal is better for stable. And of course, if we do have the art of the logos, we recognize there is a reality. And equally so for logos. And he did give us this one. He said there is a true and firm understandable logos. True and firm understandable logos. So we're bring notes together. So this is kind of a division stage. So we're going to keep populating this as we go, and eventually we can unify them under a certain word that will help us understand the art of the logos better at the end of it. Let's keep reading. So here we go. Socrates, just to reiterate from the text, it is reasonable, but the logos is different from human beings in this way. The sick condition he called the greatest defect, the hatred of the logos. The sick condition, gone past it, happens whenever anyone puts their trust in some logos as being true, like the ones we're getting from Socrates, without the use of the art of the logos. Bing, bang, bong.
Flibbity, gibbity nonsense.
Whoops. We need the art of the logos. And then if you are convinced that it's false, so you think it's being at some time, but not being at other times, and so on with other cases. Even more so with those who spend their time contradicting the logos. And we see a lot of them, of course, in our world. In fact, a lot of people who are academic philosophers, that's how they roll. And of course, a lot of grifters and things, they just think they're smart because they can debate you. A lot of right-wingers, they don't actually add anything, they just try and silence people who are objecting against tyranny by contradicting. Like that meme, prove me wrong. He's not going to be proven wrong, he doesn't care. So without the art of the logos, especially with those who spend their time contradicting the logos, they believe they're most wise, and they alone have thoroughly understood that there is nothing that exists that is sound or stable among realities, there's being, or any logos, there's our understanding. But that all exists without rules of art. There is no art of the logos, says these people. That's crazy, because that's their whole thesis of this text, that this is what would make you a hero, the greatest hero. And things are, as it were, like the churning of the European straits. The rivers that churn and are hectic, in and out with the tides. Everything is Everything is unstable like that. But there is a certain logos that is true and firm and capable of being understood. But if you at one time believed that to be true, but at another time untrue, and you did not blame your own lack of the art, but shift the blame, again it's not blame, it's cause. You don't recognize that the cause is you're lacking the art of the logos, but shift it away to the logos itself, then you will spend the rest of your life hating and reviling logos. Oh, dear goodness. Thus, being deprived of the truth of beings and knowledge. So these are the stakes for us. The worst condition. You won't get there. You won't reach the truth of beings and knowledge. And of course, Socrates has been talking about the secondary effect of helping others, but this is the worst condition. From the chat, is the noom part of the logos? What's noom? N-O-O-M. Nous. Ah, yes, nous. Yes. Good question. Good question. Well, he seems to be in this part talking about the understandability. And he says that it's through understanding in a certain way that we get dianoia. Let's go back to where he talks about nous. Where is it? So early on, when he's giving his doctrine. So here we go. A person who does this... Oh, here we go. So, we don't see it through the bodily perceptions. The self-justice, justice itself, beauty itself, goodness itself. But also those other things we've been talking about, greatness itself, health itself, strength in itself. And in one logos, the ousia. And later on he talks about how that ousia is the unity of all of them. They're all the same thing. They all have the same essence. Whatever each self has to be, that which is most true of selves is contemplated not through the body, but whosoever of us prepares themselves by most accurately understanding each self they investigate, dianoia. That person approaches closest to the intuitive knowing, the nous of each being. Approach each being with the self-understanding dianoia, without associating sight with our understanding, nor dragging along any other sense perception, not one. With our reasoning, there's our logos. So use of the logos. So to answer your question, if the use of the logos is tied to the art of the logos, then that is some sort of understanding that purifies self by self. There's a clue, because that's one of the categories of the dialectic. Tries to track down each of the unalloyed beings. So now we've heard the argument about unalloyed beings. It's not composite like our body. It doesn't break down. It's unalloyed. It's not made of parts. Self by self. Liberating oneself as far as possible from the eyes and ears and, in a word, the sum of the body, since it troubles the soul and does not enable her to acquire truth and mindfulness. Those are the two big ones we're after. Truth, which is this nous, and mindfulness, some integration of the truth and our understanding of it into our virtues. And so, I didn't answer your question, but I share that question. It's tied. I think it's tied in some way. And of course, if there is, and later on he talks about in giving the logos of learning, because Simmias is not familiar with the logos of learning. He says, by the way, when we learn about things like beauty or equality, where do we see it? For us to recognize it in our everyday world, where do we get it from? We must have existed beforehand, because you never see beauty itself. You never see equality itself. And even you recognize beautiful things or equal things before you've even reasoned about them. And so let me find it. So he concludes that not only does the logos of learning demonstrate itself because we're learning, because we learn, let me find it, about beauty. Okay, these are the reincarnation, to become a good daemon is our goal, to be most like self, the divine and deathless, and phronesis. Talks about the Egyptians who wrapped the body up so that maybe they could separate from the soul, from the body longer. I'm looking for... No, yeah, earlier. Here we go, right here. So this is Socrates talking with Simmias. So Simmias isn't familiar, Cebes is, with the logos that all learning is remembering, which would mean necessarily the soul had to exist before our physical birth. Take notice, says Socrates, O Simmias, must the following be the case for us? If on the one hand, that which we are always repeating, the word is repeating, is the case that the beautiful, the good, and every ousia such as this, which we refer all the things from which our perceptions arise, so all of our physical perceptions refer to that. There has to be some noun from which they get their adjectives, but also Socrates says they all seek it. And that's how we start in philosophy. You start by noticing physical things. So all our physical things refer to those ousias, to the same ousia, by discovering they exist according to hyparxis. Hyparxis is the apex, or the fullest flowering. So they're all the same ousia. Hyparxis prior to ourselves, so that we must necessarily compare those to selves, just as if they do exist in this way. And this must also be true, be in this way for our soul. It must be a hyparxis of the soul. And it must be this way prior to our birth. But if they do not exist in any other way, could this logos even be discussed? So there is an eternal being of the good, the beautiful, and all of these things that we learn about and all physical things refer to. But even for us to have this dialogue, we're following some line of reasoning called the logos. So here is where he drops in the idea that maybe even the logos is one of those eternal beings of the ousia. It has to be in this way, and there's an equal necessity for them to exist and for our souls to exist before we are born. Simmias says, the same necessity, the self or same necessity, appears to me absolutely, Socrates, and the logos indeed takes refuge in beauty, in the same way that our soul and the ousia of which you speak both exist before we were born. So here's another clue. He's saying, hey, you know what takes refuge in beauty? All of those beings. They're all the same ousia. So we've said the ousia, number one. Number two, the soul. There must be a hyparxis of soul, because if the thing that we're remembering is all of these beings, equality, sameness, justice, goodness, then we must have had all of them. We wouldn't have had just... You've never come across someone who can recognize a beautiful thing, but not recognize the idea of two sticks being equal. So if there's a hyparxis, then our soul must have been united with that hyparxis, meaning there's a hyparxis of soul. But he says it takes, the logos takes refuge in the same way as soul, which was the second argument, and ousia. So ousia, soul, logos. So there's another clue. Simmias is recognizing even the logos takes refuge in beauty in that way. So there's some clues to your puzzle, Nitro Gold. If nous is the knowing, the apprehension, the joining with this ousia of all of the beings, and it's also the hyparxis of the soul, how does it relate to the logos? Because for this logos to be discussed. It's a good question. I hope I haven't destroyed it. I hope I've just given you more clues about it. In the chat, hey, welcome to the chat. Salok in the first. What type of philosophy is this? I am really new in learning philosophy. Oh, great. Well, you're in the right place. So, this isn't ethical philosophy. This is the single philosophy. So, what we're doing in this channel, and you can catch up on the old videos on YouTube as well, there's a link below, is we are wanting to understand the truth about ourselves, about our purpose, about where we came from, where we're going, and what we should do. But, oh, thanks for the follow. But here's the thing. While philosophy is the kind of learning that can allow us to reach our most meaningful goals, our destiny, and it is the kind of learning that will allow us to understand the cause of all human problems, it's the most misunderstood thing out there. So what we consider philosophy nowadays is not philosophy. And Socrates is making this point in this text that we're reading together. He's saying, hey, look, there is only one philosophy. Now, if you don't do philosophy in the correct way, philosophy means love of wisdom, philos sophia. If you don't recognize wisdom is about this, which we're reading in the text, being, that there is a reality called being, that's the cause for all of our learning, and has an understandable nature, allowing us to return to it and recover it, making it a spiritual tradition also, because you have to separate from your senses to experience that which is prior to the sense world. If you're not a philosopher, what you'll end up being is something called a lover of the body or lover of opinions. You will think there's only the physical world. That's the realm of opinions. And you will make the claim you will end up thinking, well, there is no reality, because if there's a reality, then it's objective, it's universal. Everybody can know it. And if there's a logos that's capable of being understood, then there's a way for all of us to understand our nature and the nature of reality. Which means it's not about opinions. It's not about beliefs. It's not about debates or arguing. If you know the truth of something, you don't have a debate with someone about their opinions. It's you follow that path of the logos to reach being. So they call it the perennial philosophy. So the word philosophy now means many different, I'm glad you find it interesting. Now it's taken to mean that. It's the opposite. It's opinions, love of opinions. Socrates calls it philodoxia, love of opinions. So people say, oh, I like Hegel's philosophy, or I like Kant's philosophy. Well, they're just his opinions. If there is a true paradigm, then you can recognize, well, everybody is going to be, let's draw on a picture. Everyone is going to be somewhere along that ladder of development. Just like any other art. If there's an art of medicine, it's not an opinion. You can't just be some joker off the street and say, well, I've got an opinion of medicine. I should do surgery. No, you go to jail. That's crazy. And we can say, well, okay, you've got one side of this ladder, understanding, or the logos. Actually, logos isn't right there. Let's say dianoia. The Greek word is dianoia, and it's important we learn the Greek because dianoia is different than what we mean in English when we mean understanding. So we have to develop our own language. We'll actually recover a language that has the truth in it. Dianoia. But also, it's your states of mind. States of mind. And that's called nous. Well, okay, nous is up here. Nous is a high one. So if you have an understanding about the world that everything is meaningless, that's called nihilism. There is nothing. It's right down the bottom. That's going to be an understanding, and there'll be a kind of logic to your understanding at that level of reality. Of course, everything is illusion. Nothing is nothing meaningful. But that way of understanding nihilism will also affect your state of mind. But then, if you come across someone like Socrates who has the art, like the art of medicine, but the art of the logos, they might be able to use what's called the logos. And by the way, I can't tell you exactly what it is. Part of this quest is to figure out what it is, and we're learning about the logos as we go. And its use, the dialectic, to ask certain questions of that person and say, hey, by the way, are we having a conversation? Can you use words that I can recognize? So there can't be nothing. There is at least some commonness between us. So then maybe they can go from this rung of the ladder, nihilism, to this one. And they think, oh yeah, there's language, but that's all relative. There is no truth to language. It's kind of like an agreed upon thing. Like we agree what the word blue means, we agree what beauty means, and so on. It's relativism. But there's no actual way of joining with each other at a higher level of meaning. So there'll be a certain way of feeling that's a bit better than nihilism, based on their understanding. And then, likewise, you can have another conversation with them and say, well, actually, when you say it's all relative, like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, don't we have things like supermodels? Isn't there it's all relative? Yes, exactly. As it is relative, isn't it? Yes. But isn't there some standard? Like, don't we have supermodels? Isn't there something more universal than just opinions? Right, okay. Well, yes, there is something that does exist, but it's just the physical world. It's just it's a biology thing, really. So you can say, well, that's a level of thinking called materialism. And there'll be a kind of understanding that makes sense. Like we're just like billiard balls knocking into each other. There are laws of physics and that's it. When we die, we're worm food. There's nothing higher than that. And there'll be a certain state of mind. Like you're not mired in illusion like a nihilist. But if everything is just physical, what about the soul? What about our purpose? What about consciousness? It's kind of an empty sort of a state. Then you can say, well, actually, hang on a second. Aren't there sort of principles that the physical laws must follow that have an existence? So maybe there's a higher stage than materialism. And then you can start asking them questions. Well, hang on a second. Those principles, did they have to exist before the physical world? Prior? So we give the term metaphysics, which means prior to physics. Things like sameness or equality as an idea, did they have to exist? Right, you used, yeah, that can be fun. The trolley problem is kind of a fun little exercise about ethics, but we're going beyond that because we want to reach the truth of reality. What is reality? Not just the truth of reality. What's the self? What's the self? Because even when we get to this realm of nous, like maybe there is a realm of reality that is our purpose to seek. Some people think, yeah, there is, but we can't get there. God doesn't care about us. There's no connection between us and the divine. And then, of course, we can keep using the dialectic and ourselves for our own benefit. Realize there is this higher realm of being. By the way, once you realize that there's a realm of being that's necessary, and you're using the logos to understand it, now you're in the realm of philosophy. You've gone from a lover of learning learning about trolleys and how many people you want to mash with your trolley. That's a kind of learning, but it's still in the physical world. So the thing about the trolley problem is, well, where does your ethics come from? How should you live? What is justice itself? Well, if you don't realize the question is about justice or fairness, then you're going to be confused. But if you realize, well, hang on a second, for there to be justice, and if I'm doing the trolley problem, like, do I want to kill one person or do I want to change the track so it doesn't kill 3 people but kills 1 person, but I was an active agent? You're asking a question about justice. So this is where you can get into philosophy, real philosophy, not the way it's taught, not these trolley problems. Addressing the cause. What's the cause of my action? So you go from a just action, the trolley problem, to which is an A, the word is A, which is an example. You kill nobody in the trolley problem. Oh, well, yeah, because you're amazing, so I'm glad that you kill nobody. But that's a just action, right? It's an activity. And the word just is used as an adjective to describe that action. Now, this is the world of the senses, the particular world. So we use the word A. You derail the trolley, okay. So what philosophy does is realize, hang on a second, if we have one just action with the trolley, and then we have another just action with whether or not you steal bread to feed your starving family, or another typical philosophy problem. If you've got many different examples of justice, these are the particulars, you have to ask the question, where does the idea of justice come from? For there to be an adjective, there has to be a noun. For my shirt to be black, there has to be a thing called black first. And if our physical world, we only see examples, A's, we want to go to the, not a just action, but the justice itself. Now you're in real philosophy. Now you're doing what Socrates is saying, proper philosophy. You're not concerned with particulars because these will go up and down with opinions. There's no truth. That's why the trolley problem is unsolvable, because the people who use it, they don't recognize that there is a truth. And Socrates in the Phaedo that we're reading is saying, hey, by the way, if you don't have the art of the logos, you will be convinced by people who are good debaters, who love arguing, who think they're smart and wise because they can shoot down any argument. And you'll be led to conclude there is no reality. There is no realm of being. There is no justice itself. And there is no way of reaching it through understanding. There is no logos. And that's the worst condition you can have in the soul. To end up hating the logos and believe there's no reality. So we want to go from A's, examples, to these. From adjectives to nouns. What is justice itself? Same thing with beauty. What is a beautiful thing? No. What is beauty itself? What is the paradigm or the model that causes many beautiful things? That's real philosophy. Now, the problem is, Socrates, this was the philosophy up until Socrates, but after Socrates, the Romans took over, and they didn't have a word the. They only had a. So that you could only talk about a trolley problem, or a beautiful dog, or a beautiful person. You couldn't ask the question, what is the beauty, or what is the justice? Because they didn't have it in their Latin language. So we were, by nature of our language, cut off from real philosophy, from our golden age. By the way, this is not just understanding, it's dianoia, it's also states of mind. So it's also a rational spiritual tradition. Because if there is something called being, and a cognitive function that we have called nous, which is apprehending that realm of being, which is eternal, which is universal, which is pure, which is deathless, eternity itself, which is the model for all of our physical world and its principles, if we can know it in a cognitive function called nous, very better, like much higher than opinion or belief, then that experience is a spiritual experience. The Taoists might call it enlightenment. The Hindus might have an experience of this in their tradition. The Buddhists might have a experience of this. So it's a rational spiritual tradition as well. And of course, there are lots of problems with spiritual traditions that don't have the art of the logos. Because you might be somebody who's reached this level of enlightenment, this state of mind or experience of a reality outside your body, transcending your individual identity, personality, soul, experiencing that which is eternal. But then you might walk along and pass someone in a different tradition, like a Taoist passing a Buddhist on a path, and you might not recognize each other. Because theirs is not a logos-based tradition. It's based on, well, usually a rejection of logos. Thinking is a sickness. Let go of your thoughts, that kind of thing. But a philosopher can come along and say, oh, I see where you are because I have the whole ladder. I have the art. Just like a doctor can recognize someone with cancer and someone with tuberculosis because he has the whole paradigm. He has the art. And likewise, above this level here, you can say a personal trainer, not just fixing sickness, but perfecting. You've got a healthy body, but you're still not the ideal body. You go from a doctor to a personal trainer. Oh, okay, I see where you are, but you could be here. Here's the training regimen you should take. So a philosopher, someone with the art of the logos, could recognize a Buddhist and know what sort of questions to ask him or engage him to help him learn the logos himself, him learn the art of the logos, to go from this stage of enlightenment to this stage of nirvana. And from maybe he's reached this stage of nirvana and this Atman level. They have their own language, but that's what it means to have an art. Not just dealing with nihilists and relativists and materialists, physical people, but even Taoists and Buddhists and things like that. But that's secondary, of course. We want it for ourselves. And Socrates is making that point. I'm not like the people who don't move from loving opinions and debating to actually loving philosophy, wisdom of this. Their metric for what makes things true is whether or not they can get people to agree with them. I'm not interested in that, says Socrates. I'm greedy. I want it for me. I want to believe what I believe because I see it's true. So, and by the way, he said, you can't just trust. You need the art of the logos. Because if you trust Socrates' argument, it might be true. Someone who's a debate bro might come and convince you otherwise, maybe appeal to your prejudices or your religious upbringing, and it might sound real. And you'd be like, oh, hang on a second. I thought this, but now I thought this. Maybe logos is crap. Or maybe there is no reality. Or maybe I am no good. Because I was a judge of Socrates' argument that the soul is immortal and there's a realm of being. Now this guy came along and contradicted everything. Now, so another part of philosophy is looking for key terms and structures. Because there are things and there are relationships. That's all that there is. There are only things and there are relationships. So Socrates pointed out you might end up hating yourself or doubting yourself. I'm no good as a judge. Your reality or mind, because that realm of being is mind itself. Or you might end up hating the logos or your own thinking. Now, we recognize this as a triad. Oops. And triads are key because there's it's one of the most fundamental patterns in the logos, in reality. So this is a kind of self-triad because these are levels of excellences. If your thinking has gone from thinking about how many jelly beans there are in China or the migrating habits of a tree frog to thinking about the nature of reality, what is justice itself, what is beauty itself, what is the good itself, what is same and different, what is greater, lesser, whole, all of these sets of terms that we call selfer, by the way, these are selfer terms. Why? Because we're interested in justice itself. Not an adjective, but itself. Now, the Greek, this is why this tradition is new. It's ancient, but it's new. Only in the last 10 years or so have we got translations that actually translate the Greek properly, because the Greek doesn't say justice itself. It says self-justice. This word autos in Greek, self, is significant. And it holds a puzzle because it's multi-layered. As we read, we'll see it, because there'll be one reading that refers to the particular. Like you say, oh, I went to, I'm talking about my soul, and if I think that the soul dies when my body dies, then I will think that self is not like being. Now that word self, I'm talking about the soul, the subject of the sentence, it. But the word self also means honorific, self-justice, self-beauty. Honorific means the highest or the ideal in being. So one of the questions that we're doing as we read is, what is being? Because as we read, Socrates drops clues. He doesn't do it for you. He wants you to play the game, because that's how you can learn the art. He will use certain words. He will mention, when talking about being or reality or mind itself, he might talk about it being pure, and then later on he might talk about it being immortal. Later on he might talk about it being unified. Later on he might talk about it having a hyparxis. Your job, or our job together, because it's not a one-person game, it's a 2 or more person game, that's why we have this channel, is to collect all those key words, put them in a sack. Whoops. This is my picture of a sack. Key terms, and carry them with you. Because these are key terms related to being. But then, as we go through, we'll learn there's a way of organizing our key terms in a certain way called the dialectic. It's the structure, hierarchical ordering of the key terms. So these key terms, and by the way, if they're all selfer terms, that's the self logos. So if logos is reason or thinking or language or words, self logos is what we're after. We pick up these self logos, we put them in a sack. We have to develop a question, by the way, because you won't want to organize your key terms into a dialectic unless you're genuinely curious yourself about what is beauty or what is justice. You get puzzled with the trolley problem for so long, and you're like, and they want me to make the just action, but I don't know what it is. Oh, what is justice itself? So I have the paradigm, so I know how to apply it in every situation, including trolleys. So you have to look for a question from yourself, which is different from the spiritual tradition, because they give you questions like, what is the sound of one hand clapping, that kind of thing. But that's another reason why philosophy is Socrates calls it the one true spiritual or mystical tradition. He says many are the staff bearers, many are the people who carry a staff and call themselves mystics. But the true mystics are those who do philosophy correctly. And we want to understand why. So we want to take that statement and make it a question. Why is Socrates saying this is the true spiritual tradition? I mean, we've got a lot of examples from this reflection right now, but we want to make it our own. And then we take these key terms, arrange it in a dialectic that it has an effect on us that might bring us to experiencing that. And by the way, the people who have that experience say, oh my God, it was me. I experienced consciousness itself, mind itself, reality itself. Oh, some people will say, I experienced justice itself. Everything was perfectly the way it should be. Some people say, I experienced beauty itself. It was, by definition, the most beautiful thing ever. And they're right. But we don't just want to like trip acid and experience it as a one-off. We want to get there through understanding. And there's a significance to doing that. We talked about recognizing people where they are in their ladder. But ourselves, we get into ups and downs during the day. We want to be able to recognize when we're low or when we think there's no meaning. And how can we relate to ourselves through an art to bring us back up? Not only that, we want to integrate our experiences. So if we experience the realm of being that many modern philosophers in the Latin tradition, which is modern philosophy, follows modern European philosophy, follows the Latin tradition, which is doesn't have the word the. They don't even think that there is this thing. When we get there, we want to understand it, maybe go into it deeper. And then when we come out, we want to use it in our judgment for the trolley problems. Not only that, there's this higher self, the one self. Because if there is, in the same way we looked at, hey, there's a beautiful cat, and a beautiful person, and a beautiful painting. And then philosophy is going from the particulars to the universal or the noun. Well, hang on a second. If in this level of reality there's self-justice, self-beauty, self-goodness, then couldn't you make those into a set of particulars? In which case, all of the learning that you've done here that brought you in to here, you can take that with you in your back pocket and try and apply it here, which can take you from the regular spiritual or mystical experiences to potentially this. What is the cause? Or what is the noun that gives rise to these particulars? And that's the one self. So on this channel, you can go onto YouTube and we read through Socrates' teacher, Parmenides. He gives a outline with self-logos terms in a dialectical structure, not about this, but about this. Very, very rare. In fact, he does give one about this in his second hypothesis, but his first hypothesis, Parmenides, Socrates' teacher, when Socrates was like 19, I think, gave a dialectic on the one self. And in philosophy, that's our goal, to know thyself. It's you. It's the most immediate, it's the most personal, but it's also the most impersonal because it's all self. It's the most immediate, but it's the most transcendent. By the way, you have to make arguments for the divine. Religious people have to make arguments for the existence of God. Does anyone have to convince you that you are a self or you have a self? That's the first hypothesis, and we read through it on the YouTube channel. You can find a playlist on the one self. And the reason why we read through it is because we need to do it ourselves. We need to find the keywords. We need to discover the pattern. We need to apply it, have a question. We need to make it our own, because if you have a question, you're on a quest. And if it's your question, you can focus on it. If you focus on it, you can go from concentration to meditation. Meditation is sustained meditation, sustained concentration. And if it's your question and you see the stakes, the significance of it, as we are doing with the Phaedo, we're seeing the significance of the art of the logos. It's interesting. It's the greatest hero's thing. It's the greatest hero story. It's the greatest benefit he can bestow. His swan song, he's calling it. It's the opposite of a bee leaving his sting when the bee dies. He's leaving the greatest thing for us. So that's why we're so curious about what the heck is this art of the logos. So it's our question. So we focus on it That's meditation. If you can focus on it, sustained meditation, that becomes contemplation. Now, the thing about contemplation, so this is a continuum of focus and concentration and stuff. But contemplation is a joining, which is why we want to contemplate the beings, because if we're contemplating self-justice by having a question and doing a dialectic on it, we want to unify with it. That's nous. To go back to Nitro's question, nous. Very different from science. In the world of the physical, you're only in the realm of probabilities. Down here, below this line here. But up here, you can actually know it. You can verify your understanding in a direct experience, which makes it a spiritual tradition. That's nous. That's our goal. We want to know. And as a saying, you wouldn't send your slave to the banquet. If there is something which is the ideal of beauty, the ideal of justice, and it's experienced as perfect bliss, you'd want to get there. Especially if, not only for your integrity and your own understanding, but because it kicks ass. So that's nous. That's what elevates it from physical science. That's why our questions are about the realm of being, because we can join with it. It is an object you can join with. If you're contemplating pumpkins, I don't think, even if you sustained your concentration, even if you sustained your meditation into contemplation, but you are contemplating pumpkins, I don't think you could end up joining with a pumpkin. Okay, so let's go into the chat. I knew about the trolley for a while, never thought about it. Okay. Thought about the same. There is an actual part of psychology where the creative responses get tested. Yes. So this would be true psychology. You're right. And it's important to test your hypotheses. And so this would be the paradigm. Testing your hypotheses in your own experience. In the dialectic, that's moving from, the dialectic has 4 parts. By the way, we have to learn this ourselves. And the first one is definition. The second is demonstration. And our hypothesis today is if Socrates is being the greatest possible hero, not only must he define what is the art of the logos, that which is necessary to not only climb this ladder, but Socrates pointed out, hang a second, this ladder has a shadow. We perfect ourselves up this ladder, but our problems aren't a lack of understanding or a lack of knowledge or nous. Our problems are when we think we know something that's wrong. Think about the biggest fascists or biggest jerks or tyrants. They think they have knowledge. They think they're smart. They think they've got it all figured out. It's the shadow of this perfection that we have to purify ourselves from. So that's why the art of the logos not only gives us what we need to reach our destiny, our highest goal, but it also gives us what we need to understand what causes our problems, our repeating cycles of problems in our life, and escape from fate. So those are the 2 big themes of this book we're reading, Socrates. He in fact says at the beginning of the book, he took his chains off his leg to begin this discussion. And we often talk about being chained to fate. So purifying ourselves from our problems doesn't reach our highest goal. Just like if you've got a broken arm, you go to a doctor to heal your sickness or your broken arm. But that doesn't mean you've got the ideal of your body. There's 2 parts. So we want to purify ourselves, which is using the art of the logos terms, the dialectical structure, representing understanding dianoia and states of mind or nous. But we also want to recognize its shadow is the cause of our problems. All human problems. So the art of the logos gives us what we need to solve problems, purify, and perfect to our destiny. Therefore, Socrates isn't a hero in the same way Superman might solve one problem, like save the Joker from polluting the water supply. He's giving us what we need, not to address particulars, like we talked about particular examples of justice or examples of beauty. He's giving us the ideal or the cause. He's giving us what we need to address all problems down here and all perfection through the spiritual and personal development. So that's the significance of the art of the Logos. And we're saying, hey, not only does he have to, if he's calling this the art of the Logos, that which is universal, that which is needed to solve problems and reach our destiny, he has to be able to define it. He can't be like Superman who can just demonstrate his power. He has to be able to understand it. Otherwise, we can think of a more ideal hero who can do it and understand it. There are two parts of that ladder, understanding and experience. So he has to define the art of the Logos. He has to demonstrate it. But the third part of the dialectic is division. He has to break it down into its parts, into its elements, into different aspects, so that we have what we need if we are matching him, if we are up to the task. This isn't like school where they push ideas into you and they want you to memorize it. No, it's an active thing. Socrates said, if you just trust me, someone's going to contradict me when I'm gone, and then you're going to end up hating the self or hating the mind or hating the Logos. This is the greatest defect you can have. This is the problem. So these excellences, you'll end up hating the self-Logos. There is no understandability to reality. Everything is just opinion. Or you'll hate reality. There is no ultimate reality. There is no world beyond our physical senses. No, that's garbage. Screw Socrates. Or you might end up hating yourself. I'm a load of trash. I'm not good enough. Maybe there is a reality, but it's not good enough. I'm not good enough to reach it. Maybe there is a self-Logos, but I'm not smart enough to do it. Bollocks. Everyone has what they need to do this. So yourself, your mind, and your thinking is within you, but these are also three levels of reality, three dimensions that you could call them dimensions, I guess, too. So, Socrates saying, hey, if you just believe me, you're going to end up with this terrible condition. It's called the pathologos, the sick logos. So if Socrates is going to be the ideal hero, not only does he have to define the art of the Logos and demonstrate it, like do it with his friends, because they have problems, like they don't think, I don't think that the soul is immortal. Can you demonstrate this art of the Logos? Lead me through this dialectic, up the ladder that we were talking about, to a higher understanding and state of mind. Remember? Understanding is this rail, and this rail is state of mind. Lead me up. Because it's very convincing. People who are down here who think, the soul is just a byproduct of our physical body. It's all chemicals and endorphins and squirting stuff in the brain. They say that when our physical body dies, that's it. Our soul doesn't last. So can you help me out here? Can you demonstrate the art of the Logos and take me from this belief to this belief? That the soul is immortal, because I fear death. Now Socrates is saying, look, you can't just trust me. You have to yourself have the art of the Logos, because if I convince you and then someone else contradicts it, you're going to end up in that terrible condition. Everything's going to go bad. You're going to throw yourself, your reasoning, and reality into question. So Socrates has to provide the art of the Logos in pieces, in a certain kind of way that we can get questions. Just like a video game. You walk down a corridor, you see, there's a painting. And the eyes of this person, this portrait, has a gem in each eye. Then you walk down the corridor and, there's another painting with a gem in each eye. Then you walk down and there's another painting. But it's missing the gems. So that's a video game trope. You have to realize, hang on a second, there's a pattern here, but some of the terms are missing. Or maybe the terms are there, but they're in the wrong place, and you have to, like Socrates will give us the negative. He'll say what it's not. He wants you to fill in what it is. He wants to engage you. You're not supposed to believe him like we believe Kant or Hegel, or debate bros think they're smart and wise because they can make people believe them with their ability to own someone in a debate. He's saying that's a terrible condition. This is the cause of all human problems: civil discord, war, people fighting. Dialectic isn't fighting. Dialectic is an art. Philosophy is a cooperative game. Not cooperative, but a team sport. It's win-win. So, for us to play, we can't just believe. He has to divide up this art of the logos into key terms and patterns that if we match him, if we are up to the game, if we approach the text with the same level of integrity, without interpretation, reading what's there, not adding things that ain't there or leaving out things that are, that's interpretation, read what is, then we can engage it ourselves. That's the division stage. And then the fourth stage is synthesis analysis. That's when you take these things and you synthesize them together into a unity, or one of these terms is more hierarchical, so maybe one of these terms sits causally above all the others, and you take that and that synthesis, and then the analysis part is you take this back to the start, what you've learned through definition, his definition of the art of the logos, you have now seen for yourself in a new way. This dialectic turns about upon itself. That's ousia. It's a Greek word that means to turn about upon yourself. It's also the nature of those beings, by the way. So you turn back around the start and you see the first thing in a new way, but it's your seeing. You've leveled up. And there's a button. You've improved. You've seen what was defined in a new way, and it's yours. So Socrates has to define it, demonstrate it, also divide it up in a certain way where we can do this. So you could say that we do these two parts. Socrates is doing these two parts. So there's a dialectic between him and us. So it's like the ideal video game or the ideal hero's journey, but we are playing it. And we could only do this in the last 5 years because only in the last 5 years have we got a translation with the key terms. The past translations the translator hasn't been able to translate it accurately. So they've missed the key terms, and also we could also recognize the personal interpretations and cultural influences. So this is the game. This is what we're doing. It's Socrates, even today, is called the father of Western thought. The big dog. He is saying, and he said, look, I've completed my reincarnations. I've done my work here. I've sufficiently purified and perfected my soul. But I'm going to leave you something. He gives the negative. I'm not going to be a bee that stings you and dies and leaves you with a sting after I'm dead. I'm doing the opposite, whatever that is. And by the way, it's tied to the art of the logos. And he's given us the stakes. If I can't do it, I'm setting you guys up for failure. For the worst condition of the soul. But if I can, I am being the archetype or the ideal hero. Not solving one problem like Superman. All problems. Thumbs up. But for us to see that, we had to have been participating all the way. I think this is episode 40 on the Phaedo, and you can find them on YouTube. You can go through and watch them at your leisure. So this is kind of a summary for your benefit, and also it's good to review. So don't take anything I've said on belief. None of it. Use that to inspire your curiosity, to encourage you to watch along, join the Discord, to share your insights, share your understanding. If you do your own dialectic, Socrates said, not only do a dialectic on these things you're interested in, but mythologize them. Use your art. Like if you say, oh, I've done a dialectic on what justice is, and how justice relates to our soul, and how justice relates to beauty. Take each of these terms and make a character. Make Justice Spider-Man, make the Soul Captain America, or make your own characters. Or if you're a painter, make these characters in your painting. If you're a musician, make them parts of your song. In other words, take the dialectic of philosophy and represent them mythologically. And Socrates says, that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to explain and mythologize. In fact, he said at the start of the Phaedo, my dreams have been instructing me to make songs. I thought they were encouraging me, like cheering me on, like you cheer on a runner, because the greatest music is philosophy. This is the greatest music. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe he means actually make popular music. So I'm going to take the fables, like Aesop's fables, and I'm going to add the logos in. I'm going to use the characters and the themes and the stories that people are familiar with, and I'm going to add the logos into it to mythologize what I've been doing in philosophy. And I'm going to make my own songs too. So I encourage people to do that too. And we've got a Discord, so you can share. This is my dialectic on the soul. Using terms from the text, that's important. Arranged through my understanding of the dialectic. You don't have to be perfect at the dialectic. This is my understanding of dialectic so far. And this is my little story that represents it. This is my Harry Potter fan fiction. So that's what we're doing. Okay, Nitro Gold talking about the Big Bang. Okay. But even if thinking about creative thinking, for example, awakening philosophy, depends on if there are passengers on the trolley problem. If there were no passengers, okay, cool. Absurd trolley problems, cool. 28 different levels and how you responded. That sounds like a personality test. Like, which Sex and the City character are you? Or which Simpsons character are you? Answer these 20 questions. So solve these 28 trolley problem questions, and then we'll give you a personality test. You are a psychopath. You killed everybody. Or you are a which Rick and Morty character are you? You're a Rick, because you didn't care if anybody dies on the trolleys. Okay. I like the train of thought, yet my question stays that if there is nothing, isn't there maybe something to make nothing something? Right. That's important. And Socrates has been saying, actually, let's find it in the text. So in the text, he's talking about philosophy being the art and practice of death and dying, which is separating the soul from the body. But for that to be the case, his friends are saying, well, hang on a second, that would mean that our soul has to be immortal. Can you help us understand why? And he's given several arguments, and they followed them. But then both Simmias and Cebes gave counter arguments. Like, oh yeah, but I also think I heard this argument. And everybody in the room were like, oh my God, I followed Socrates and I believe what he said about the soul being immortal. Followed that as arguments. But what these guys are saying kind of sounds familiar and attractive. Now I don't know what to believe. So that's why he said, no, that's why you need to learn the art of the logos to think for yourself. So he's going to come to the aid of the logos. But he also said, let's find lament. He said, by the way, if it wasn't the case, if the soul did dissipate upon our physical body's death, then I wouldn't be upset about that. That would mean I'm losing my ignorance. Look how he says it. Okay, he says, look at the greedy way I use the logos. For If what I say hits upon being true, then it has to persuade in a beautiful way. So he's not doing it to convince others like regular philosophers think that they're wise because they can convince others. He calls them, so philosophia means love of wisdom. Philos, love, Sophia, wisdom. This is the word, and I've forgotten how to pronounce it. Look it up. He says the people who claim to be wise and just spend their time contradicting people, like the trolley problem. You're not actually teaching anyone about justice, you're just contradicting whatever they say. And you think that you're so clever. Look at me, I'm teaching you there is no justice, there is no answer to the trolley problem. Therefore, screw the world, let it burn. Let's not address tyranny, let's not address injustice. Let's not unify all of these conflicting religions and spiritual traditions with a true understanding. Let's not solve human problems. Let's sound really clever because I can contradict everyone. It's bullshit. He calls them something. He calls them not lovers of wisdom. So wisdom would be asking questions about the nature of justice. What is justice itself? Is it knowable? And how do we know it? And what would it be like to integrate it into our being to be just at all times? Now that's philosophy. Lover of wisdom. Philonikos. So here in the text, he says, hey, let's read it. So the greatest defect is you trust in the logos as being true without the art of the logos. So we want to know what the art is. But then somebody convinces you it's not true because it's just belief. Don't want to be stuck on belief, especially by those who spend their whole time contradicting the logos, like we said. Oh, the Discord link is expired. Oh goodness, interesting. I'm gonna have to fix. Thank you for that. I'll figure out how to fix it. Right, people spend their time contradicting logos, and they believe they are most wise and thoroughly understood because there's nothing that's sound or stable. There's nothing that actually exists and is good in the realities. Or the logos. Just contradicting all my students. And there's no rules of art. There's no art to the logos. There's no techne and skill. But if there is a certain logos that is true and firm and capable of being understood, but if you have that experience where you believed it to be true but then later untrue, but you didn't blame your own lack of the art, but you thought it was the logos that was at fault for you to be mistaken, then you will have this greatest defect. You will spend the rest of your life hating and reviling the logos, and you will thus be deprived of the truth of beings and knowledge. Phaedo says, who's the narrator, "By Zeus, without a doubt, that condition would be a pitiful state of affairs." Socrates continues, "We must guard against that condition, and we must not allow our soul that dangerous conviction that there is nothing sound in the logos, but much rather that it is us who is in no way maintained in a sound way. And we must bravely and eagerly pursue being maintained in a sound way. For you and the others, for the sake of the life still to come, and for me, for the sake of my death, because they're going to keep living, he's about to be executed, we run the risk of not maintaining a philosophical attitude about the self." Notice, it's all about the self. That's what they're interested in. The self. What is the self? Because even the greatest experience of enlightenment has to be experienced by something. But those who are quite unenlightened have a contentious attitude. The word is philonikos, which is lover of fighting or attacking or arguing. So not philosophia, philonikos. Debate bros. For the unenlightened, when they engage in argument about anything, on the one hand, they will in no way care whether or not the logos under discussion maintains any phronesis and ousia. Now, one of our questions is, what is phronesis? It's some kind of ultimate virtue that never loses its power. So that's a puzzle that we've been exploring. Ousia, of course. So there's the two words. So that's why we have the Greek, because there are puzzles that you can only see if you see the Greek. Even in this greater translation, the Balboa, which is much better than the previous ones, mindfulness doesn't capture the puzzle, because Socrates has been saying, philosophers seek the truth and knowledge, that's ousia, and they also seek the virtue called phronesis. So, those who are philonikos, lovers of fighting, don't know whether the logos they're talking about maintains that state of being called phronesis and ousia. But on the other hand, they are only eager that those present believe that which they set forth. They're only interested in people believing them. That's how you earn the money on all those right-wing grifters and things. Often they don't even believe it. They know that they're audience locked. We call them audience locked. They just give what they think the audience wants to hear. But I differ from them only in this way, for I shall not in any way be eager for those present to believe that what I say is true, except if it's secondary. I am eager that myself, again, self, altos, thoroughly believes that anything I say has to be in this way. Behold in what a greedy way I use the logos, my dear companion. For if what I say hits upon being true, surely it has to persuade in a beautiful way. It'll be naturally persuasive. But also, this is the key. This is the key thing here. If nothing exists upon after death, well then indeed, for this time even less shall self be inclined to distress, and those present with laminations. So he's arguing that the soul doesn't die when our physical body dies. But he's saying if it did, even less would he be upset. Even less would he distress his friends who are sad that Socrates is about to leave them. What the heck? Why? Notice the way he says it. Even less shall self be inclined to distress, since neither will my ignorance continue to exist along with self, if that were to happen. That would be wrong, since it would come to an end a little later. Thus, here I am thus prepared, O Simius and Cebes, to come to advocate for the logos. But don't be persuaded by me. Give little thought to the person of Socrates, but more so to the truth. But don't oppose me if you have any problems, so I don't trick you and me at the same time. And just like a bee, leave behind my sting when I go. So there's a bunch of puzzles in there that we have to unpack. He's giving us the negative, thumbs up. He doesn't want to be like a bee that stings you and dies and leave behind its sting. That's the negative. So we have to do the positive. We have to play. What would be the opposite of that? That's what he wants to do. Also, what does this thing mean? If the soul dies when our body dies, he is saying the conclusion would be, my ignorance would not continue along with self. So why is the soul tied to ignorance? And why would this be kind of a better thing? Not a better thing, but he wouldn't distress about it. He's saying that the soul does exist, and there is continuing on, a byproduct of the way that we live, how we nurture the soul, whether we engage in philosophy or whether we nail our soul to the body by pursuing our physical senses, and our pleasures and pains. But he said if that wasn't the case, it is the case, but if it isn't, I wouldn't be worried. Why? Look, he says, my ignorance would come to an end a little after. Why? This is a big question for us. Why is he tying ignorance to the soul? And also, notice, exist along with self. He's not saying existence comes to an end. He's not saying self comes to an end. It's clear and fundamental that the self can't come to an end. For the Greeks, everything is from self as the first cause. Everything is in self and everything is returning to self. Thus, their mantra or their maxim that they lived by, inscribed above the oracle at Delphi, know thyself. So how does this relate to the question about the Big Bang? Yeah, logically it would follow there can't be nothing and then something. It doesn't make sense. So if whatever is, and if there's a realm of being necessary for there to be justice and beauty itself, and to be nous and knowledge and levels of spiritual enlightenment and immortality after our body, it had to come from somewhere. What's that first cause? And if it's our goal, could we call it the first and final cause? Because he's saying, hey, he's already talked about there being a hyparxis of the beings and a hyparxis of souls, a singular soul, just as there is a singular being. Again, the same thing, particulars to the universal, from the adjectives to the noun, from the a's to the, from the many to the one. There are many examples of beauty, but we want beauty itself in being. But there are many beings, or many aspects of being. So where do they come from? Well, no, it can't come from nothing. That's the thing. That's irrational. It has to come from somewhere. So if ultimate reality is our focus in philosophy, that's what dianoia means. Dianoia isn't understanding like how many tree frogs there are in Africa. It's not understanding our physical world. It's specifically understanding the realm of being, that which is eternal, pure, true, the cause of our physical world. So our physical world is called the world of becoming. Everything is in change. It's coming to be and then decaying. It's a fluctuation between opposites. But the realm of being is its cause. And that's what we encounter when we do contemplation. Socrates calls that separating the soul from the body. In fact, that's his yoga he gives. So at the start of this text, he gives his yoga. He says the yoga, most if not all yogas have at their core how to separate the soul from the body and experience that which is non-physical. So he has a yoga here. He calls it purification. This purification is what we mentioned in the logo some time ago. To separate the soul from the body as far as possible, and to be accustomed to gather herself together from all quarters, and, so there's parts, and to collect self by self out of the body, and to dwell alone by self as far as she is able, and both now and in the future. For the parts to that yoga. Being liberated, as it were, from the chains of the body. This liberation and separation of the soul from the body is called death. Simmias says, of course. Socrates continues, therefore only those who practice philosophy in the right way are always most eager to liberate self And this liberation and separation of the soul from the body is the study and exercise of the philosophers. That's his definition of philosophy. Separation of the soul from the body, which is being dead. It's the art and practice of death and dying. So those who practice philosophy correctly are studying to die, says Socrates, and we fear death least. So we'd have a different idea of courage. If courage is talked about as charging to your death, but out of fear of something worse happening or because you have to, that's not courage. If you seek death because you understand it, because you have a logos about being, a dianoia, then you have a different idea of courage, wouldn't you? They eagerly are desirous to have their soul self by self. Now, self by self is a key phrase to help us with our puzzle. You know how we talked about the ordering of those self-logos terms is the dialectic? And we had these 4 terms: definition, demonstration, division, synthesis, analysis. Let's get rid of this. Well, another way of talking about these 4 ways of organizing your thinking is definition is you are talking about the subject or self in relation to itself. So I'm going to use a mundane example, a bike. What can you say about a bike itself? Has handlebars, has wheels, has a chain. Number 2, if you were explaining a bike to someone who's never seen a bike before, that's not enough. You'd have to talk about how it functions. How the bike you've just defined, self to self, this self that you've just defined, how does it function to another? You say, how does it function to me? I ride my bike. It helps me get to the store quicker. But that's not enough too. How do you, having been affected by your bike, relate to your friends? It helps me make better friends because I can go to the BMX track and race my bike with my friends, and maybe give them a lift to the store as well. And finally, how do these others relate back to the bike? What do you do back to the bike? So notice it goes all the way back to the start. It turns about upon itself. You're not giving a complete explanation of a bike unless you talk about how you have to grease the chain. You have to keep the tires filled with air. So these are a way of understanding definition, demonstration, division, and synthesis analysis using 2 terms. Dialectic is 2. Lectic. The 2 terms, self and other. What's the subject and what are you relating it to? What are you rubbing it up against to understand it better? So the first category is self according to self. The second is self according to another that you pick. So if you want to understand justice, you could talk about how justice, what it is itself, first category. How it relates to another, you could pick how justice relates to trolleys, how justice relates to souls, how justice relates to other aspects of being, like beauty itself. Up to you. In fact, do lots. This is the exercise of philosophy. But the first, so self according to another, other in relation to another, other in relation to self. So the first category is self according to self. Now, if we haven't seen that already, we will miss the clue in the yoga. Notice, desirous to have their soul self by self. Earlier, collect self by self out of the body. It's a clue. Only if we have the Greek translation can we see these clues. Only if we've done the work on the dialectic ourselves can we see it. We have to match it. So we need to have a text that matches the integrity of the author, Socrates. And we need to ourselves match him. That's how we see these clues. So, taking that back with us, if that's his doctrine of philosophy, then what we were reading here about him not being upset if the soul doesn't outlive the body because he's going to lose his ignorance, what does that mean? Because he said, hey, okay, where is it? I think it was lament. Yeah. My ignorance would not continue along with self. There's a puzzle. Even if our soul does dissipate, there's always going to be self. That's fundamental. As you're saying about the Big Bang, something can't come from nothing. So what's the first cause? So the difference is, he wouldn't be sad if the soul dissipated or died, because ignorance is tied to the soul. What would that mean? If we're all returning to self, is that different from soul? Does the idea of soul, is that attached to you being different from others, from the one self? If that's the case, if we are here to purify and perfect ourselves through a learning that goes through our reincarnations, a learning that has to involve the art of the logos necessarily, as we're seeing, what does that do to the soul? Does it make it bigger, or do you end up removing it? Could the soul itself have a level of reality that's not the ultimate reality? Could that be part of our learning? I don't know. These are puzzles, and that's the game. Only when we match it with this level of curiosity, this level of reading, this level of integrity, looking for questions, imagining hypotheses, organizing them in the dialectic, can we discover what's there to be seen. Can we ourselves be heroes? And also, can Socrates pass on the art of the logos to us and therefore make him the greatest hero? So by helping ourselves greedily, mastering the art for our own souls and benefit, we have a secondary benefit to helping Socrates reach his pinnacle status as the greatest hero in the greatest story, by someone being able to define, demonstrate the art of the logos, divide it up for us who are willing to match and participate and play the game, and then for us to unify it ourselves in our synthesis analysis, make it our own, and thus ourselves, all of us here, become, by definition, demonstration, division, and analysis, become the ideal heroes ourselves. That's the game. That's what we're doing, Solenko. And I hope you find that exciting. And on that bombshell, and on that a cliffhanger of whether or not we are going to be able to meet him and match him and become ideal heroes and complete the life of Socrates, because he's not an ideal hero unless he can pass it on. And he can only pass it on if we match him. So greedily for ourselves and secondarily to benefit the great Socrates, are we going to be able to match the art of the logos and become ideal heroes ourselves? On that cliffhanger and on that bombshell, I hope to see you next time. Feel free to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can go back over the previous talks so that you can make this your own. You're not just believing me. And you can join the Discord, and you can follow along with us on Twitch. Ask good questions. Thank you so much for the questions today. And hopefully soon there'll be a Patreon that if you think this is worth doing, and you have the means to support it and you want to, I'll send a Discord link. Feel free to support on Patreon. Thank you so much.